We are in the bottom section on page Kuf Mem Gimel. And we're going to start about 6 lines from the top. The line begins with the word lemaylah. And the question that we have presented, that we are dealing with, essentially, we are still into understanding the difference between oyer and shefa, or oyer pnimi and oyer makif. Oyer pnimi means internalized oyer that fits inside of a keli and becomes united with the keli and fully identified and defined by the keli. So even though this is oyer, but the keli completely embraces it and translates it on the keli level. Then there is oyer makif that remains oyer under all circumstances. So the Rebbe's question over here is that even in the case of oyer makif, the oyer makif also has effect on the environment in which it is revealed. Specifically, the Rebbe is speaking the way it is lemaylah, and it is elokus versus worlds. So the oyer makif of elokus also has an effect on worlds. Not only it has an effect on the world, but that is one of its defined purposes, that it should have an effect on the world. So even though it remains oyer makif, it remains representing the source, the etzem. But as such, it relates to the world. It is not purely the etzem. It is not purely pointing to the etzem. It says the etzem has an effect on the world. And therefore, what in fact is the principal categorical difference between the oyer makif and oyer pnimi? In a relative sense, we could say oyer makif is higher than oyer pnimi, but it's not a categorical difference. They're both functional. They both have a function to affect the world. Therefore, even the oyer makif is not exclusively representing the source, the etzem. It is there to affect the world. Okay. So this is where we're going to start. And the end of that line, as I pointed out, this is actually the expression of this question. V'im kein, and therefore, since that the oyer has an effect, mahu ha'hefresh not only has an effect, but it is for that purpose. In Yoneh, this is what its inyan is, to affect. Therefore, mahu ha'hefresh ben oyer makif ve'pnimi. What in fact is the categorical difference between oyer makif and oyer pnimi? As I said, in a relative sense, we can readily identify the difference, but this is only a relative sense. But they're both essentially identified with the same principle. They're both there to affect the world, one way or another. Inyan hu, however, the principle is this. I want to point out, call our attention to another newest expression in Chassidus. We spoke about Hine and other expressions. And here I want to call our attention to another very common expression. It's called the Inyan, Inyan hu. Inyan hu. The word Inyan means the principle, the concept. In other words, we're not talking about the functional level, the principle, the existent, the tangible part of what we're dealing with. We're talking about the Inyan. The Inyan means what's behind it. What is it about? On a conceptual level. That's the word Inyan. We have a very pointed and clear question. What's the difference between Oil Magim and Oil Panimi? They both, functionally, practically, they both affect the world. And therefore, on a practical level, on the tangible level, we cannot identify the difference, or clearly identify, or categorically identify the difference. To have a categorical distinction, we have to go to their inception. The Inyan in this. And when we go to that level, and we start talking about the Inyan, which it finds them on a conceptual level, then we will see the difference. And then, of course, we'll have another challenge to see what difference does it make, whether, and I can say, since the whole difference is on a conceptual level, what in fact is the difference, practically speaking. So that we'll have to keep in abeyance, and we'll have to revisit this question. Ha'inyan hu, the inyan is this, the hine, for behold, hamuval mehamsholim hanal, that which is clearly understood and surfaces from the Masholim Hanal had been mentioned thus far, the Mashal of the sun and the Mashal of the Nefesh. It's understood from that, the Chol Shehu B'Bchinas Oir, that anything that is in the Bechina, that in the category of Oir, and what is the Bechina of Oir? The Bechina of Oir is that it's Me'en HaMoir, that it represents the Moir. It's a shine of a Moir. Not something that has been distinctly separated, so it becomes an action, but it is the oil of the moir. Anything, at any level, that retains the bechina of oil, gam ma shepoil dover, even that level, that ultimately is poil dover, has an effect externally. Ein zeh, this poil, this peula, this effect, is not k'moi piulas hashefa. this piyula is different than the piyula that is affected by shefa. This is the b'chinas oil. It's in the category of oil. As long as it's in the category of oil, even when it has an effect, it's in a different kind of effect than shefa. Remember, we are trying to identify the difference between oil pneumin and makif. So going back to the essence of that question, and we're saying anything that is a bibchinas oil is in the category, overall category of oil, even if it has an effect externally. The effect is, the action is not like the action of shefa. And what is the difference? The pe'ulo should be b'chinas shefa, because an action and an effect that is in the b'chinas shefa, that is in the manner of shefa, hu b'chinas tfisa v'yislapshus. That pe'ulo, that action, has the element of tfisa v'yislapshus, of being grasped, of being held onto, v'yislapshus, and completing view and complete involvement in this action. He has an effect and he has an action, but the action is affected by him being fully involved in this action. In contrast, different is Pe'ulas O'er. The effect, even though we're talking about the effect, the functional effect, the effect that oil brings about, is not via, or the actual Pe'ula, the action of affecting is not in a tfisa or islapshus manner. This is interesting. I'm putting in these words so that call out attention. He has an effect, and a profound effect. He changes the environment, the thing that he touches, and yet he is not involved in that result, so to speak. He remains unaffected. He remains just what he is, even though he is heavily involved in an action. As an example, in the light and the shine of the sun. Which is also true in the light and the chayas and the life element of the nefesh. As we already discussed earlier. Just to remind us of what we said there, which points to this essential difference, phenomenal difference, that he has an effect without being grasped in this action. So he pointed out there like this: the mitzad oyer b'chayz hanefesh, that from the perspective of the life, of the light, and the chayus and the life element of the nefesh. The nefesh gives life by being revealed in Azoir. It gives life, it brings life to the body in which it is imbued. The body has no life of its own at all. All aspects of life in the body is the presence of the Chayes HaNefesh. Chayus, I'm just kind of introducing the dilemma over here. Chayus is a very profound effect on the body in which it is. It is fully representative of Nefesh. As we point out, witness, the guf on its own completely disintegrates. But even if there's a nefesh, if there's chayes in it, it doesn't disintegrate. But still, it gets old and weaker as time goes on. The chayus itself is nefesh. It's a reality of oil which does not get old. So we pointed out something that brings this principle that the nefesh is mechayah the guf without being involved, without being translated and interpreted on a guf level. Where do we see that? So we said like this. I'm 3 lines from the bottom at the end. The mitzad oy v'chayes HaNefesh. That from the perspective of the oyer and the chayes HaNefesh, the life aspect of the nefesh. Again, although this life element it becomes imbued, becomes part of the guf to the point where the guf comes to life. But from this, the highest aspect, ein chiluk, there is not a difference between guf gas and guf dak, between a coarse body or a very fine and sensitive body. The kishem, where just as shebeguf echad, that in the very same body, ein chiluk, there is not a difference. Ben evorim hagashmim le'evorim hadakim, between the coarser limbs versus the finer and more sensitive limbs. It is truly remarkable that the nefesh this does not distinguish between different limbs. The nefesh, the chayes HaNefesh, the eye is extremely sensitive, and the brain is extremely sensitive. In contrast to the foot, that is hardly sensitive altogether. And yet, both of these, the foot and the eye and the brain, are alive by the result of the presence of the chayes HaNefesh. And the chayes in both of them is identical. And now let's finish this statement over here, the last line. Hare, thus we see. Again, word hare means thus observe, recognize. Recognize shahapa'ulahi, that the effect of and the effect upon the body by the nefesh is shaloi bibchinas islapshut utfiso, is not bibchinas, in a manner. The piyulas cannot, the action, the effect of the nefesh in the guf cannot be defined as hislapshus utfisa, or being involved. Because if it is involved and tfisa and becomes nitvis and becomes identified with, then it should be identified by the distinction of where it is. If it's in the coarser limbs or in the more sensitive limbs, and yet there is no difference. Let's translate this. That the effect is not the islapshus atfisa. It still remains to be defined and so forth, but just translate it on the first glance. What this means is that yes, indeed, the oil has an effect on the body, but the nefesh is not identified by this effect, and it stays aloof. It says purely what it is. In our own experiences, within the level of our experience on the body level, we have something that demonstrates this, even though it's not exactly the same.
Demonstrates what?
Huh?
Demonstrates what?
An involvement that is not without that is slapshus atfisa. That's not affected by this involvement. One that is affected, but is not involved. When you touch something, you are clearly identified and you're affected by the object that you're touching. You know of the object by its effect upon your hand. And you know it by feeling in your hand the various contours of the object. Is it coarse or is it soft or is it fine? That is the manner how you know that you're touching something. Contrast that, how you know something by looking at it. And we spoke about this many times. Observation with our eyes is very significant. It brings the reality of what we see. Totally. And yet, it is not affected by what it sees. You don't see something because it's coarse or hard or soft. Sight does not get involved, nitfas, grasped by the object that you see. Jesus explains in simple terms to distinguish between the koyach of re'iyah, of sight and hearing. And hearing is described as mikorev, from a close proximity. Hearing is less than touch. Touch is in totally close proximity. You actually have to come in proximity to the object and be able to touch it. Hearing is just a sound coming from the object, but still hearing has to come into your ear. Sight, you can see something from a great distance, and you can stay at a distance, and you just see its presence. Sight is not due, the effect and the experience of sight is not due to the effect of the object upon you. As a matter of fact, a great element of sight is in a picture. Sometimes we'll see a drawing or a picture, and it really touches us. And it's only a picture, something real about it. Touch does not relate to that. You have a beautiful picture, touch will not be affected by any of its qualities. Visible qualities. So enough of that. This is all to point out the union of being of an effect that is not bibchinas tfis of yislapshus, that does not have the quality of being engaged in what it is actually doing. Although, mind you, this is something to remember, sight clearly connects the person to that which he sees. There is a relationship. But this connection is from a distance, without him being involved in what he sees. He connects him, but without being involved. This is not be feast of his slapshus. And the same is true. The chayes on the oil al jem hashemesh and the chayes on nefesh. That the chayes on nefesh gives chayes, brings life to the goof. And there is no difference. But there is the part of the goof that he gives, that this part is a coarse part or the sensitive part. How is this? That he gives life to different parts of the body equally. And this is really a challenging thing. That the nefesh is not grasped. The nefesh brings life, brings its quality, without distinguishing where this quality, where this chayas ends up, whether it ends up in the brain or it ends up in the foot. It is everywhere in the body equally. So that as long as the person is alive, whether it is the brain that takes phenomenal qualities of the nefesh, or the foot that hardly appreciates what nefesh is, both are alive equally. And one cannot say, since the foot does not appreciate what life is, the foot would disintegrate over a time. It's not true at all.
They're both what, life equally?
Life, alive.
They're both equal.
Yeah, they're both alive equally. The presence of the nefesh is equal in both of them.
But not, obviously not sensed equally.
They're not sensing it, and the nefesh is not these lapses. Nonetheless, the nefesh is there, and the nefesh is there in a manner that it doesn't distinguish between one part of the body and another part of the body, to the extent. So the foot does not appreciate what nefesh is. The brain absolutely does. And yet, one will not say that the foot is going to disintegrate before the body, before the brain. As long as the person is alive, life is equally applied everywhere in the entire body. And the question now is for us to understand, how is it from the perspective of the nefesh? The nefesh is what nefesh is. How is it that the nefesh is present in these different places in the body which are so categorically different? And the answer is, the nefesh gives life. And from that perspective, the nefesh does not distinguish what is mechaya. And the fact that it doesn't distinguish tells us, hooray, it tells us, it shows us that it occurs without these slapshus and tfisa, without being involved in the element of bringing life to the goof. Which means, in effect, that the life in the goof occurs as a result of the presence of the nefesh, not as a result of the nefesh working on the body to make it alive. For if it were a direct action and a focused action in the nefesh to bring the body to life, so then there would be clearly a difference between how the nefesh relates to brain or how the nefesh relates to foot. The fact that we see that there is not a difference tells us that the nefesh is not engaged in this life production effect. And the reason, and this is still going to be elaborated, but the principle at this point, the reason that it is so is that the manner in which the nefesh reveals itself and gives this life to the body is called oir, not shefa. Let us take half a minute, bring this to, so to speak, to a fulcrum, to a clear statement. The clear statement in this is that this life force that is in the body it is incorrect to say that there is life in the body. The correct statement is that there's a nefesh in the body. The life cannot exist without the nefesh continually being present. It is the presence of the nefesh that this life alludes to, rather than the presence of the oiran, of the oir of the nefesh, of the oiran chayes. This is the pshat that this is in a manner of oir. The principle